Hi everyone, alright, so I'm going to be introducing you to a real-time render engine for Cinema 4D. The awesome thing about real-time render engines basically means that there's no waiting time, so you get to see your end result immediately. Now the concept of real-time render engines isn't anything new. Your video games use real-time render engines like Unreal and Unity, but the fact that we get to use this directly within a program that we are already comfortable with like Cinema 4D, I think is really awesome. So anything you do within the program updates immediately. So we'll be setting up a very basic scene, and this scene right now is in real time. We'll just be setting up basic materials and lighting, and I'll be showing you all of the other settings like the depth of field and bloom, and you guys can decide if this is something you would maybe use within your workflow. Alright, so without further ado, let's get started. Alright, so go ahead, check the description of the top comment. It's going to take you to this page on URender. So we're going to be using the trial version, but what's really cool about the trial is there's no time limit and you can use it completely for free. You can see it's supported by AMD and NVIDIA cards, but the fact that they don't put a time limit on that I think is really cool. So it allows you to use it for as long as possible. It's got all of the features included, and if you guys actually like this program, you can go ahead and support the developers and actually go ahead and purchase it. Anyway, URender needs two programs, so we're going to need the latest URender installer, right? And then you can go ahead and choose the Cinema 4D plugin for whatever version you're using. I'm using Cinema 4D R20.0.59. So go ahead, download the version that you need and download the URender installer. Make sure you install this first, and then you can check the installation guide to find out how to actually install the plugin into Cinema 4D. Alright, so once you've got everything set up, you'll see here by plugins we've got URender, and we've got all the options available for us over here. Right, and now this window, this is the live viewer. By default, this isn't going to show up. Now remember that original installer I said that you need to download from the website. You've got the main install and then the plugin. You want to go ahead, go to your start menu, find URender, and open up the URender, which is going to be your live viewer. And then this is going to be open, and then from there we can move on and actually send our geometry straight over to the live viewer. So let's set up a basic scene. I'm going to create a sphere. Alright, and then I'm going to go to render, edit render settings, and here by renderer we want to select URender. Right, now if we go to plugins and we go to URender over here, we can send the sphere over to URender live viewer. So there we go. And of course you can see there's a watermark on here because we are using the trial version, but we can still see everything perfectly fine. But there we go, we've got our real-time render viewport ready to go. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my sphere, and if this window tends to disappear, you just want to right click over here and say always on top. It means that even if I'm clicking over here within my 3D workspace, this live viewer won't disappear. So that's just something to keep in mind. I'm just going to resize it for now. Now here by the sphere, let's put this on 48, and let's create a plane as well. So just move that below the sphere. You can see everything is updating in real time within this live viewer. Okay, so move that below the sphere. That's good to go. Now we want to go to create shader plugins URender material. Now URender materials are the only materials that are going to be visible within the live viewer. Right, just like any other render engine, whether it's Redshift or Octane, you create materials specific for that render engine. So that's something to keep in mind. So this first material, I'm going to drag and drop it onto my sphere. And if I double click on that, it brings up our material editor. So here by color, I can change this to any other color. If I want it to be blue, you can see it's updating in real time. I can go to reflectance. Now I usually work with roughness. I can bring this down to just increase the specularity on our sphere. And that's just how you create a basic URender material. So I'm going to press Ctrl-C, Ctrl-V, duplicate that. Let's just name this sphere. So I double clicked over there, press enter sphere, and this is going to be ground. Right, so one thing that they really need to fix is that whatever material, like whenever you're changing the colors over here, it actually doesn't update in real time with the actual material preview, which I think is something they really need to adjust. But anyway, as long as we've got our real-time preview over here, it's fine. We can always double click and see what our material is. So I'm going to change this to black, and there we go. Alright, so let's get some lighting into our scene, and we can just use the default lighting within Cinema 4D. So we can create a regular area light. You'll see as soon as I move this over here, within our viewport, our URender viewport, everything is being updated and we can see it being applied immediately within our scene, which is really cool. So I can press Ctrl C, Ctrl V, create another area light on this side, rotate that. You can create one more area light above the sphere. Again, very basic scene, just introducing you guys to the program. But there we go. This is how the actual lighting is applied and works within our scene. Now, obviously, there's a lot more we need to do within our scene to get things to actually look a lot more accurate. But obviously, we're going to get to that. So we set up some basic lighting. So yeah, let's move on. Alright, so let's get this lighting to actually look a lot more accurate. So over here by our lights, I'm going to select all three lights, right click, and I'm going to create a light tag. So any lights you create, you want to make sure you're creating these tags, right? Because it's specific to URender and it has its own sliders here and settings. Anyway, while all three are selected, the first thing I'm going to do is here by attenuation, I'm going to change that to inverse square. So immediately, I'm going to have to do that to all of them actually. And you're going to see that the lighting is going to look like there's actual lighting in our scene now, right? We can see light being cast on the floor and on our sphere as well. And then we can adjust this radius decay. Right, so if I bring that up, that's going to make the light a lot brighter. So that's one way to actually control the overall brightness of the light in our scene. Now another thing that's not present over here is the shadows, right? There's light, but there's no shadow being cast. So you want to go here to shadow and put this on soft edges, right? And do that for all of the lights, right? You want to put that on soft edges, and then immediately you can see that we've got shadows in our scene, and then we can control the quality of these shadows by adjusting our sample radius. So the lower this number is going to be, the much more sharper our shadows are going to be in our scene. Okay. Just one more thing to mention regarding this lighting. Obviously, if you increase this radius decay really high, you can see that there's a shift in the color value over here. Now, I'm not 100% sure why that happens. So I tend to keep it just a little bit low. Try not to go too high. And it's usually fine. Then, of course, I can control the intensity of the light by actually controlling the intensity here as well. And if I wanted my light, instead, because right now it's casting in both directions, I could select single-sided, and then I feel like this would maybe give you a little bit more control over exactly where that light is coming from. Right, so it's not going in both directions, so that's just one way to control it. So you can see when it's really clamped up closely over here, we're getting that shift in the color value. So maybe just move it a little bit further back and play around with the lighting. Right, another thing, if you guys go to lights, you can also change the color of your lights over here, which is pretty cool. So you can set the mood by controlling the overall lighting. So you can paint color with your light as well. Which is something really basic, but I thought I'd mention it anyway. But there we go. And again, I think it's so cool that we can see all of this being done and updated in real time. Right, so there we go. We got the light set up and you can see this a lot better. Maybe if we just isolate one light. And again, the power of real-time render engines, you're not waiting to see anything. You're seeing your results immediately. So this light, wherever it's being cast, I can see exactly where my shadow is and I'm good to go. Right, so now we can actually go to the render settings over here, because there's a lot of stuff we can adjust here and enable and disable. And one of the first things I'm actually going to enable over here is going to be screen space reflections, right? So here by reflectance, if I enable this, right, and if I go to material like the ground plane, and here by color, sorry, by reflectance, and if I scroll down, you can see we have enable screen space reflections. So now, obviously, the sphere that's on top of the plane is now visible within our ground plane. So that's one way to get reflectance, and we can do the same for the sphere. So I can enable that, and now the actual plane is visible on my sphere as well. Alright, so I turned all my lights back on. Now, if you guys have played video games, you're probably familiar with this term, anti-aliasing. Now, if we look at our viewport over here, you'll notice that there's quite a lot of these jagged edges on our sphere. Right, so to get rid of that, by URender under Basic, you just want to go to anti-aliasing and turn on FXAA. And that's going to help to smoothen this out. And you can enable multi-frame sampling and increase the samples over here. Right, and it's just going to look a lot better, but this is going to affect the performance a little bit. But you'll see if I turn anti-aliasing off completely, you can see those jagged edges are a lot more prominent. So that just helps to solve that. Alright, so another cool option over here under Basic is the fact that you can actually enable displacement. So we can actually see real-time displacement. So I'll go to my ground material here by displacement. I'm going to load in an image, a tileable material or a tileable pattern that I created, so this hex pattern, right? And then I want to increase the subdivision level so I can see it a lot clearer. But there we go, we've got real-time displacement, so I can adjust the height and we can see displacement being applied in real time. Alright, so let's head back to our render settings, and here by environment, a lot of the stuff is self-explanatory. We can change the background color, so if you want it to be white, there you go. And this over here that says environment map, if you guys have any HDRIs, you can load them over here. So I'm just going to load any HDRI into my viewport. Right, if you guys have access to HDRIs, this is exactly where you load them in. You're going to see it's going to update over here. Right, and there we go. So I can reduce that blur factor so I can see more of the HDRI's background. But now we actually have HDRI lighting in our scene in real time as well. Okay, you can adjust the exposure. Oh, and enable this option over here called Enable Diffuse IBL. Right, it just makes the lighting that's being applied in your scene just look a little bit more accurate. Right, there's also some samples and occlusion that you can adjust, but just make sure that's enabled. And you can see you can get some really nice results by using an HDRI. Okay, so if I wanted to, obviously I can disable all of these lights, so it's just the HDRI, and use this to rotate the light in our scene. But there we go, so real-time HDRI lighting within URender. Alright, so moving on to the next one, reflectance. We already covered this. I showed you how to enable screen space reflections. So we actually got reflections on our materials. But something I forgot to mention is the screen fade start. If I actually increase this value, you can just see more of the reflection on our sphere over here, or at least that's what I've noticed. And if I went back to the sphere material and came down to screen space, we can even increase the exposure so that the reflections on our sphere are a lot more prominent. Okay. Right, so the next option is shadows. Now, I usually just put this on 4K, but I haven't noticed a difference in the quality, even on 256, so it's pretty strange. But anyway, I still put that on 4K. Here by effects, we have some really cool stuff to play around with. We've got motion blur, depth of field. But talking about motion blur, I actually don't know how to get this to work within URender. So if there's anyone here using URender and you know how to enable motion blur, feel free to comment below. Anyway, we've got depth of field, so real-time depth of field. You can see already in our viewport, our scene is looking quite blurry. So to actually have a lot more control over this, I'm going to create a camera. Alright, and then I'm going to right-click URender tags and create a camera tag. So within the camera tag, you can see over here we've got depth of field settings, so we can control the focus distance and even our f-stop as well. Right, so to actually see this a lot better, you want to make sure you actually got the camera enabled. Right, so if I go ahead and duplicate our sphere, and let's put one in the back, for instance, there we go, we can control our depth of field. So you can see where my focus distance is. If I reduce my f-stop, it's going to create a lot more depth of field. Then I can choose my focus distance, right? I want that sphere in the back to be in view or in focus, or I want the sphere in the front to be in focus. So it's really cool that we have access to real-time depth of field as well. Okay. Alright, so another really important option to activate is this enable screen space ambient occlusion. So this is actually going to make the shadows in your scene look a lot better. And just to show you this, just so I can show you exactly what I mean, just go and create this figure. Right, let's bring our figure just in front of our sphere. Right now you can see we've got quite a lot of depth of field going on here. Let's drag and drop the sphere material onto our figure. Okay, and what I mean by this ambient occlusion, right, you can see there's an actual shadow over here between the figure and the sphere. If I go ahead and disable that, I'm not getting that information. So this just makes this look a lot more accurate, and it's really important that you adjust that, and you can control how much of that ambient occlusion is going to be visible in your scene just by adjusting the radius. Alright, so I'm actually going to go ahead and disable my depth of field, even though it looks really cool. Right, and the next option is going to be bloom. So bloom adds like a glow or a shine onto, a lot of the times, onto the edges of 3D objects. Just makes them glow. So it's really cool if you've got lights in your scene. And yeah, there we go. So that's what bloom does. And then we've got fog. Now the fog in this program, it looks okay. I mean, it does what it's supposed to do. It creates this sense of fog being in your scene. You can control the density and even the distance of the fog. So let's duplicate the sphere. And we'll create some further in the distance. Now you can see those that are a lot further in the distance are being affected more by the fog, just by controlling this distance slider. Okay, and then the height fall off, if we put this on something like linear, over here, and I decrease this value, you could see we could create something that looks like almost a low-lying fog in the scene. And of course you can control the density as well. So there is real-time fog. Unfortunately, I didn't notice any real-time volumetric, so lighting doesn't really seem to pass through the fog and create like those rays, those volumetric rays. They would have been really cool to see in real time. But anyway, if you guys wanted fog, there is fog included with URender as well. The next option is tone mapping, and this is really cool. This helps you control, like maybe if you've got highlights that are really blown out, you can control the white point and even the exposure. So tone mapping also really comes in handy, or you can choose some presets over here like exponential or Reynard, just to control the exposure, or if any areas are really blown out within your render. The next tab is post-processing. So I'm sure some of you are familiar with chromatic aberration. Right, it creates like this shift in values between red and blue. It's usually what you see, I think, with 3D images as well. So you can really crank that up. It also adds like a sense of imperfection onto 3D images. Here we go, we've got chromatic aberration, and we have vignette as well. As you can see over there, you can control how much of that vignette you want visible, how soft or hard you want the vignette to be. And yeah, so that's going to be post-processing. Alright, and the last tab is multipass. So this comes in handy if you guys want to basically render out specific passes of your image. So if you just wanted a pass for the reflection or the specular, and you wanted to have separate images just with those particular attributes that you can control, maybe in Photoshop you just want to control the diffuse or the specular, then this is the section you would use up. Honestly, I don't use it that much. You see, you can even render out a depth pass. But yeah, so that is the multipass. And then of course, once you're ready, while we're in the render settings, you can change your output size over here, and you can click on this icon, and it's going to go ahead and actually render out an image for you that you can save out as a still image, as JPEG, or any other format. Okay. One more thing to mention, if for whatever reason your live viewer is not updating when you move in your viewport, just go back to your plugins and click on URender Live, and it'll just resend it back to the live viewer. Alright guys, so that's going to be the end of this introduction. Let me know what you guys think about URender in the comments. Is this something you guys can see yourself using? I think it's really cool that it's in real time, and the fact that we can see end results immediately, and the fact that this is also compatible with Cinema 4D. So anything you do within Cinema 4D using MoGraph or animation or anything like that is going to work with URender. So you don't have to go ahead and melt your brain and try and learn an actual game engine like Unity or Unreal. If you guys are comfortable with Cinema 4D, you can also have the power and the capabilities of using a real-time render engine. So you can see the type of results you can get. Obviously, this is just a very basic introduction, just showing you the material, setting up lighting and all those different settings. Go ahead, experiment with this. Let me know what you think about this program in the comments as well. And yeah, that is going to be the end of this tutorial. As always, guys, stay tuned for some more videos and tutorials. And thank you so much for the support on this channel. I truly appreciate it. Till next time, goodbye.